I'm realizing most of the time we aren't stuck in anything but the idea of our own stuckness. I think that when we get into the lives that we live and we recognize that there's some type of stagnation, whether that be in our environment or in our own personal development, I think we have to recognize how we play a role and we play a part in certain attributes of that. And when I say that, I really just mean that I think stuckness is really just a mental thing. I think our stagnation is only in reference to our ability to constantly reference the same ideas and thoughts over and over again. And I think it's about giving ourselves a present opportunity to sort of embrace new thoughts, not necessarily in search, but in willingness to listen to them whenever they come. I think there are plenty of things in the world that sort of show us what we need for a moment. And I think the moment is the only place where you're ever going to know what you need for now. The past won't teach you how to heal the present. The present's the only place where you're ever going to see the things that you need to heal. So I think the objective is really just to be present enough to see past our own delusion, our own illusions in a way. And when I said that, I really just mean that sometimes our stuckness in our, I guess, identification with certain attributes of ourselves that are unchanging is really just an illusion. It's us thinking that we are stuck that way, and by that essence we are, because we keep on mentally impressing the same thing over and over again in expectation that somehow we'll be free from it. Or maybe there's no expectation at all. I think it's about sort of allowing yourself to be in the moment in a way, allowing yourself to listen to new ideas, allowing yourself to be new with the ideas, not necessarily keeping yourself stagnant in the same repetitive loops and cycles. I feel like the biggest cycles that we embark on are always mental. They're always within us, not necessarily within the world that we inhabit. You can do a million things out here in the world, but if you're stuck in something within you, then you're not going to experience it in any different way. I think what allows new experience to occur in a real way is our ability to be new with the experience. It's our ability to sort of let ourselves go and leave our previous notions and ideas behind, because I'm starting to believe that thoughts are more so a collective rather than a set thing. And I think our minds or ourselves, whatever, is just inclined to think in the same patterns that we have fed it over and over again. And I think it's in the present moment where we're truly able to see sort of a world without words, a world without thoughts. And in that world, we're sort of free to actually create whatever we want. Not in essence of just physical creation, but in essence of us actually being able to create a certain feeling, being able to create a certain air of comfort wherever we are. Because it's not really about the circumstances that we find ourselves in. It's not really about the circumstances. Because, if the love is really for us, if the appreciation is really for us and our character and us, then it wouldn't change depending on the circumstance. It wouldn't change depending on the environment or events. It would be a set thing. It would be a consistent thing. And I think the way that we allow certain thoughts and opinions to jeopardize that is sort of what keeps us stuck in that idea. I think it's about bringing yourself into the moment, bring yourself into whatever you're doing, and letting yourself go through that something by not occupying your mind constantly with the idea of your own stuckness, by not constantly occupying your mind with the idea of your own stagnation and certain questions that take us away from our answers. Like, maybe I'm able to, for example, make a video right now, but if I was just obsessing over the thought of my inability to, or whether or not I could, then an anxiety might be built around the idea. Instead of actually doing something, it becomes, I'm going to try. And in that try, it becomes, I'm going to allow myself to fail in a certain way. Not necessarily because we want ourselves to fail, but because we sort of open our mind to a certain possibility within our thoughts. And in that way, we have tuned into that thought and tuned into the thoughts, or tuned into the actions that will follow it. And especially the feelings that follow it. I think that, if we never even thought of the notion of anxiety when it comes to maybe like public speaking or anything, I'll just say that because, a lot of people have that experience as kids when they're talking in front of their class, whatever. If we never even occupied our mind with the idea that, other people's perspectives trump our own, if we never occupied ourselves with the idea that we need to be filled by the external world rather than our internal selves, then we would have been comfortable in doing it, because it wouldn't have been about appeasing other people's perspectives, and especially our perception of their perspectives. It would just be about sharing our own. And that's where I think our stuckness is truly bred, and our inability to recognize that all we're ever doing is sharing. All you're ever doing is expressing yourself. So it's not even about your, effort to see the ways in which you've expressed yourself, effort at which to see the ways in which you need to change. I think the parts of ourselves that seek out change are most heavily present in the present. We'll see it in the way we express ourselves. We'll see it if we're willing to listen to what's here. And I think, the lips of wisdom are closed to those who are unwilling to listen. It's not about your effort to find information. It's about your willingness to listen to information when it's presented, and your ability to be present where you are, void of certain answers. And I don't mean that to say that, we shouldn't ask questions, but to say that sometimes our questions do take away our answers. It's because we think that we already haven't found it, that we haven't. And I don't mean that to say that our development is stuck. I don't mean that to say we're static. I don't mean that to say that there's an end to the journey that is self-development. But to say when we're trying to overcome the past, it's important to be in the present, not in the past. And I think sometimes our questioning is what leads us back to these certain ideas. And I think it's about also acknowledging how easy it is to ask a question. Even if you're at the top of the world, you might ask, is this the highest point? And then you're filled with a certain amount of doubt. You're filled with a certain amount of this, is that, and the other. And I don't mean that to say that we have to be delusional in our acquisition of information and understanding, but to say we shouldn't demean our current achievements in reference to things that hypothetically don't exist, or things that do, but we aren't currently achieving. It's about appreciating things for what they are and as they come. And I think when we learn to sort of appreciate ourselves in kind, then our development doesn't really become about our run and search and constant chase for our own betterment. It just becomes us allowing ourselves to be where we are and using that where we are to do what we can with what we have. Otherwise, we're never going to do it. The only opportunity we ever get to do anything is within the present. And the more we get caught up in our ego and identification with ourselves, the more we're going to make abstractions from that present. The more we're going to be stuck in our mind rather than in the actual world. We're going to think that, oh, my thoughts contribute to this, my thoughts contribute to that. And in some essences, they do. But only in the essences where you allow your ego to actually be the first and foremost thing you interact with. I'll just say this. Whenever I have genuine conversations with people, it doesn't even feel like I'm the one talking. I'm not thinking about what I want to say. I'm just saying it. I'm expressing myself. We're talking. We're in dialogue. And in the same way, when I'm painting, when I'm writing, when I'm doing anything I feel like makes me feel like myself or brings me to the present, the objective isn't to, oh, I'm Ian, I'm going to write. What would Ian write? It's I'm writing. Our preoccupation with ourselves when we're doing certain actions is what I think limits our action. It's what stops us from being able to actually be free within the expression, because we're so caught up in the idea of ourselves. Because we're so stuck in this idea of, oh, I can only express myself in this way, because that's what I've, one, maybe already done, or two, what I've been told that I can do and what I've accepted for myself. And that's what it means to be, I think, stuck in your own idea of your stuckness, caught and being caught in a way. Because it's like not even in acknowledging you're stuck by your own identity. It's the very notion that your idea of stuck, your idea of free is relative to you. And if we constantly keep it relative to us, then all of our stuckness is going to be in reference to stuckness. It's already a confined perspective, and I think we need to open our minds and our eyes to what's around us in a way. Not to say not thinking about things in our past that harm our present. I think that's important. But I also think that being present with those thoughts, and what that means to me, is not necessarily being so overcome by the thought that you can't recognize where you are, but recognize certain events for what they are and what they've done, not necessarily what they no longer occupy. And what that means to me is, you know, actually recognizing the impacts of certain things. And in recognizing those impacts, using your mind to think of solutions, to think of things that you can do for yourself to get you out of that way of thinking. And each person's thing is going to be relative to them. And that's why I think it's about your stuckness. It's about your idea. And it's just about our ability to sort of see past our own bias in relationships to ourselves. I feel like the biggest thing that we have to do is give ourselves a chance. To sort of be free in our own understanding by freeing ourselves from our own understanding. We have to recognize that we can't know everything. And it's important to not know everything, because that means you can know more. I think the only way to truly learn something is to show up to the lesson. I think the only way to figure out the right answer is to accept your possibility of being wrong at times. And I don't mean that to say that we have to ground ourselves in a constant delusion or a constant teeter-tottering, like, oh, I might be wrong about this, I might be wrong about that. But doing what you can with what you have, using the information that you have at your disposal to the best of your ability. And sometimes that's just in being present and choosing certain things that align with that. Because what I'm recognizing is thinking isn't really the objective. We're not supposed to just go out here and think. We're supposed to go out here and experience. Go out here and experience ourselves, experience the world for what it is, experience ourselves for what we are. And if what we are is constantly just in reference to our thoughts, then we're sort of limiting ourselves in our ability to experience the world around us in reference to things that are somewhat fictitious, things that we don't really know 100%. If you recognize that more of you is gained in every single one of your experiences, and what that means to me is recognizing that more of you is found in your being present in every single experience. And every time you allow yourself to be one with the experience, you sort of grant yourself an opportunity for growth. And if we're present, we can choose which way we grow. Like, there have been many scenarios, experiences recently that have been both positive and negative for me. And I think it's in my presence with those certain things that I've actually been able to choose solutions, choose ideas, choose ways that I could express myself that would free me from my own limitations in feelings in a way. When I say free myself from feeling, I don't necessarily mean that feelings are a bad thing. But to say that our overzealous focus on our feelings and overzealous focus and preoccupation on, how we feel takes us away from how we can feel. It's like in thinking that we ought to be hurt by this certain thing, we become hurt by this certain thing. And that's not to say that there's no cause, there's no reason, there's no justification for being hurt. But to say that we have to recognize our own hand when it comes to our own pain. And in that same light, we have to recognize our own hand when it comes to our own healing. If we're responsible for our own healing, we have to be, in a sense, part of our own pain. Because we have to be a part of and acknowledge ourselves to be able to heal. I don't think you can heal what you don't acknowledge. And then going back to the idea of being stuck in stuckness, being stuck in your own ideas of your own inadequacies. I think we have to recognize that we're already adequate as we are. We're just constantly building upon something that's already good. And I think looking at it that way stops you from, demeaning yourself and taking away from yourself in your attempts to gain something better. It's almost as if by trying to be good, we force ourselves to acknowledge that who we are is bad. Something good can get great. Something great can be amazing. And it's just about your willingness to allow yourself to occupy those certain spaces. What is good if not in reference to other people? What is great not in reference to other people as well? Especially if we allow that to demean ourselves. Now, if you look at good in reference to you, then it's just in reference to your ability to do what you actually can. If I'm going to do my best, it's not about, I'm not thinking of things that I can't do. If I'm going to do my best with my mental health, for example, it's not like whatever I think is my best is outside of my capabilities. And it's about doing your best so you can see that sometimes the ceiling that we place in terms of our best is only in reference to where we are right now. And that's why I mean when I say something great can always get better, and that we're stuck in the own idea of our own stuckness, because we reference our growth to where we are now constantly, or we reference our growth to where we were more so, and we stay firm in this idea that, you know, who we are isn't a constant change, and who we are is some static thing that's not changing time to time, moment by moment. And I think if we would allow ourselves to be present in a way, then that change would sort of be more of a natural thing. It would be in reference to us actually seeing the ways in which we can change, seeing the ways in which we can express ourselves and understand things in a different way that allows us to exist in a better comfort with ourselves and the lives that we live. There are plenty of things that aren't necessarily going to be answered for us blatantly. But I think if we actually open ourselves to listening, then we'll recognize that sometimes the world doesn't speak to you in plain words. Sometimes it's in your own actions and your feelings about your own actions, what you feel aligned with, what you feel present while doing. And doing those things so you can actually experience becoming who you are and being who you are and letting yourself go enough to let yourself be found. All that to say, thank you. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you are taking care of yourself, doing what you can, what you have. And